Good evening, everybody. Nice to have all of you here with us. I'm Muhammad Ali, and I'll be your host for this evening. Welcome to the Sojourners to Settlers Tamils in Southeast Asia and Singapore webinar. This is a series. This series is brought to you by the Indian Heritage Centre Singapore with the generous support of the Tamil Language Learning and Promotion Committee, Tamil Language Council, and Yuva Bharati International School. In December 2019, the Indian Heritage Centre and the Institute of Policy Studies co-published and launched Sojourners to Settlers, Tamils in Southeast Asia and Singapore, a seminal 2-volume publication on Tamil diasporas in Southeast Asia and Singapore. Leading up to the launch of the Tamil version of this publication in April 2021, this webinar presents the research of 4 authors featured in the publication, including Professor John Miksic, Dr. Tolson Sasha, Professor Sunil Amrit, and Ms. K. Kanagalata. To complement these 4 sessions in the series, a distinguished guest speaker, Dr. John Guy of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, will also present perspectives on pre-modern Tamil trading networks with Southern China. The series is moderated by Mr. Arun Mahirnan, co-editor of the publication. This evening, we are delighted to have all of you to join us for the first session in the Sojourners to Settlers webinar. In this series featuring Professor John Miksic, Singapore's foremost archaeologist and our very own Indiana Jones. He will be joined by Mr. Arun Mahirnan as moderator for this session. Arun, as most of you know, is no stranger at all. He has been a committed champion of research and inquiry into Singapore's Tamil heritage. Most recently, he mooted and steered the Tamil Digital Heritage Project, a community-driven project aimed at creating a digital collection of Singapore's Tamil literary and performance works. Arun is Special Research Advisor at the Institute of Policy Studies, Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, National University of Singapore. He's also Director, Center for Singapore Tamil Culture, a voluntary organization to promote interculturalism. Publications that he has edited include Sojourners to Settlers, Tamils in Southeast Asia and Singapore, as well as Singapore Chronicles, a 50-volume book series commemorating Singapore's 50th anniversary. Arun, it's my pleasure now to invite you to introduce this evening's session and the speaker.
Thank you very much, Ali, for your very kind words. And to all my friends, good evening, Vanakkam. It is really my privilege to be the moderator for the series, and a great pleasure to have so many of you attend this first webinar. To the contemporary Tamil Singaporean, Tamils and Buddhism would seem almost totally unrelated. Certainly, they don't see the same level of affinity as they see between Tamils and Hinduism, Tamils and Islam, Tamils and Christianity. Now, some Sri Lankan Tamils may recall the Buddhist connection in the land of origin, but not much more. However, in reality, Buddhism had already reached Tamil Nadu as early as the 2nd century before the Common Era. That is almost more than 2,000 years from now. And then Buddhism is said to have flourished in 2 phases in Tamil Nadu. Firstly, during the Pallava period, between 400 and 650 Common Era. And then again, during the Chola period, from the mid-9th to the early 14th century. There were many centers of Buddhism in Tamil Nadu, including cities that we can recognize even today: Kanjipuram, Kaveripumpattinam, Urayur, and Nagapattinam. Likewise, There are many works of literature that refer to or even enshrine Buddhism principles and practices. Foremost among them is one of the five great epics in Tamil, the Mani Mekalai. Buddhism is also featured in several other epic works such as Silappatikaram, Valayapati, Kundalakesi, and Jivaka Sindhamani. As with Tamil Nadu and Buddhism, in Singapore too, many Tamils are not aware that Tamils in the region had a role in spreading Buddhism as they did with Hinduism, Islam, and Christianity. That is the fascinating story that we are about to explore this evening. Tamil influence on Buddhism in Southeast Asia. To hold our hand on this journey and to guide us through some complex and intriguing turns in history, we have one of the most distinguished navigators one could ask for. And that is Professor John Norman Miksic, an emeritus professor at Southeast Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore. As an emeritus professor, he can do nothing or anything. No one will question him. I'm just kidding, but this is an exalted position. You know, as an academic, this is like the holy grail. So Prof. Miksic is already there. He's a treasure himself while he's hunting treasures for us. Professor Miksic has an MA in International Affairs from Ohio University and another MA and PhD in the Department of Anthropology at Cornell University. His dissertation was based on archaeological fieldwork in Sumatra. Before moving to Singapore in 1987, he has been working in the region for well over 2 decades. In Singapore, he first joined the Department of History at the National University of Singapore. Then he moved to their newly set up Southeast Asian Studies program, and he has been with NUS ever since. He has served on the National Heritage Board and the Asian Civilization Museum and the National University Museum as well. He has received awards from Singapore and Indonesia for contributions to the study of archaeology in Southeast Asia. I like to think of Prof. Miksic as the Indiana Jones of Singapore. He certainly looks better, more convincing than Harrison Ford. And I think it is because his love of archaeology began as a small boy growing up on a farm in the United States. At that time, he and his grandfather will often go out and gather arrowheads from the Native American community that used to live there. These artifacts from a different era, from a different time, captivated Professor Miksic's imagination. And that's why he refers to archaeology as a process of recovering memories of the past. It was also because of the farming background that when he was in the American Peace Corps and came to Malaysia to work there, he was sent to Bujang Valley where they needed some digging. And he took to it like water to duck, as they say, if I may mix the metaphor. And there he became acquainted with artifacts of Hinduism and Buddhism and the temples that were there at the time. In Singapore, he became the leader and the mentor in many archaeological excavations and discoveries of old Singapore, a Singapore that we now know to be at least 700 years old. Today, Professor Miksic is one of the foremost experts in Singapore's early history and widely celebrated as a leader in Southeast Asian archaeology. By the way, Professor Miksic speaks an American variety of English, but he's really very fluent in Bahasa Indonesia and Bahasa Melayu. With that, I'm very proud and happy to hand you over to Professor John Miksic.
Thank you so much, Arun. It's really hard to say how I could possibly live up to that description of myself, but I'll do my best in the time I've got allotted to me here. So, as you said, this is actually a subject which is very dear to my heart because it leads me to remember many of the times when I actually first moved to this region and the experiences that led me to switch my allegiance from working on North American prehistory to Southeast Asian historical archaeology. So let me begin by just outlining the fact that the region I'm talking about is mainly the Straits of Malacca around Singapore, down to Western Java, up to southern Thailand. This is the area in which there's a considerable amount of evidence for long-term Tamil influence in various fields, of which Buddhism is, of course, one major part. It's often said that the Malays were actually Hindus in ancient times, but nothing could be further from the truth. There is one particular instance in which one important site changed its allegiance from Buddhism to Hinduism, and that was related directly to political developments in South India. But almost all of the archaeological remains we find in the Malay Peninsula, Sumatra, Western Java from the historical period are actually Buddhist, not Hindu. But because of the strong imprint on this one important site, which I will talk about because that's where I used to live 50 years ago, a lot of people think that the Malays had always been Hindu before Islam arrived. I'd like to quote from this particular Cambridge History of Southeast Asia by two respected authors, De Kasparis and Mabit, about the problem of studying early Indian cultural expansion in general, because we don't have any direct evidence from India herself describing the process. It used to be thought that much of this influence was due to military conquest, but as they say, there is no evidence for Indian conquest in Southeast Asia apart from an occasional raid in the 11th century. I think actually they're downplaying the significance of what happened in the 11th century. It was not an occasional raid, it was a one-time event, but was not just a raid, it was a major invasion. And it did have a major impact on the area of the Straits of Malacca and had a major impact on Singapore's own myth of its own founding, which I'll get around to. So it's quite relevant to Singapore's image of it itself and how Singapore came to be called Singapore, the Lion City. So we know about from archaeology that Indians, we can't say whether they're Hindu or Buddhist, but they were Indians, were already going as far east as Bali in the prehistoric period. This is a site up on the north coast of Bali, Sembiran area, which is now being eroded by the waves. And this particular kind of black pottery you see at the top here, or in the drawings on the right, it's known as Romano-Indian rouletted ware because it was made in South India, places like Arika Medu. But according to certain using Roman type decoration techniques and then exported all the way to Eastern Indonesia. And excavations here have actually uncovered a burial seen at the upper right here, the bones of which have been tested for DNA. And lo and behold, they're actually from the South Asian. We can't say India, Sri Lanka, but we can say that there were already Indians reaching as far east as Bali more than 2,000 years ago. Now, one of the most important sources of information we do have is in terms of writing. And so the importance of writing is depicted by this late 19th century photograph at the lower right, which shows a Balinese ruler in the period before Bali was conquered by the Dutch with his scribe. So writing was a very important part of the nobility's activities in, we can say, all of Southeast Asia for a long period of time. And the script they use is called Brahmi. Now, many of you have heard of Pallava script. Now, Pallava is a branch of Brahmi. So Brahmi script is found over a fairly large area. We find that it's the first kind of alphabet used in places like Eastern Indonesia and in Kedah and Western Java, Kutai, and in the Kedah region. And it's the basic origin of the script on the Singapore stone, the so-called monolith that was found at the mouth of the Singapore River when the British arrived. So from Brahmi evolved a script we call Grantha, which was developed by the Pallava South Indian Kingdom. And so this script then, which is Pallava Grantha, spread from India to Sri Lanka and Southeast Asia. It's well suited for writing on stone monuments. By the 8th century, it began to become localized, more cursive, could have been used for writing on palm leaf, was used for the next 700 years. So this Pallava Grantha script, which is a branch of Brahmi script, is what we find in ancient Singapore and all of Southeast Asia. Now we have one fragment back in the Singapore Museum again, after all 3 fragments that were salvaged when the stone was blown up in the 1840s to build Fort Fullerton were taken to Calcutta, East India Company's headquarters at the time. We now have one. There is, as you can see from this drawing, it's kind of difficult to see a lot of the characters. What we can say is that it is Brahmi script Pallava Grantha variety, but even the date is difficult to calculate. We can only say it's 12th to 14th century. And the language, again, now we have to emphasize the difference between script and language. Sanskrit is not a script. It can be written in any script, including Latin, Roman script. But it's been known as the language of the gods. It was the script that was used in these early Southeast Asian inscriptions. It was developed in North India, but then spread down both sides of the Bay of Bengal. So to southern India and also to Southeast Asia, just about the same time. It was used in Hinduism, but also Mahayana Buddhism. We get many bilingual inscriptions with the Sanskrit section at first, an invocation of the gods, and then a local language section. We get this in Cambodia, we get this in Indonesia, and the same thing happened in South India. Then we had the invocation in Sanskrit, and then the change into Tamil. So the use of Sanskrit and the local language is another common factor in both South India and Southeast Asia. Now, near Singapore, there's one other inscription besides the one from the Singapore River's mouth, which is on this island called Karimun, which is just about 40 kilometers west of Tuas. And as you sail out of Singapore, Keppel Harbor going west, you see it right smack in front of you, this quite large, prominent island. And the site where the inscription is now a granite quarry. A lot of Singapore's buildings are made using the granite from this quarry, but the hill on the right has been preserved because it has this inscription on it from the 10th century. And it's in Sanskrit language as well, but it's in another kind of script. It's in this Northeast Indian kind of Bengali script used in a lot of early monasteries, Mahayana Buddhist monasteries. And it talks about the illustrious Gautama, the Mahayanists, who was set up by a Buddhist group who possessed the Gola Yantra, a round instrument, which is an armillary sphere. So this again emphasizes the Buddhist aspect of the culture in this region, going back to the 10th century and earlier. But they could also have used other scripts, but by far the most common is this Pallava Grantha, not this kind of Nagari as it's called. The importance of the armillary sphere, it's a navigational instrument. This is an early Portuguese ruler, again, chose to be depicted with his instrument. So Buddhism and Hinduism were not terribly opposed to each other in Southeast Asia. Now, it's true that Buddha did not deny the existence of Hindu deities. He merely said that they did not enable devotees to escape from suffering into nirvana. So Buddhism doesn't provide guidance on every aspect of everyday matters. Thus, Buddhists often turn to Hindu precepts. That's why you still have Hindu priests, for example, in the court in Bangkok. They provide different functions from the Buddhist clergy. Now, we often find Hindu statuary on Buddhist sites, whether it's Nalanda in India, the great monastery there, Palembang in Sumatra, or in Borobudur in Java. We get these various kinds of sculptures from the early period. This is from the 5th century. Some are from Western Java, South Vietnam, as well as in the Malay Peninsula. And if you look at the 2 sculptures on the lower right, the one on the lower left is probably from South India. The second from the left, and the black stone, that's probably from Bengal. So we had both South and Northeast Indian sculptures coming into Southeast Asia at a very early phase. They're also found in the central part of the Malay Peninsula, South Thailand, Kedah region. Now, the period between 7th to 9th centuries is a period of political flux in India. It started off with Harsha's empire in the north. The Pallawas were already present in South India, but they were not a major group by the 9th century. Instead, their role had more or less been taken over by the Chola kingdom. And within that region, Southeast India, there are quite a number of sites which have great importance for early Buddhism. Kanchipuram, Arikamedu, and of course, Megapathanam. So here's a statue of a Buddhist image from Megapathanam, which is still in situ there. And look at the specifically way the legs and the body are depicted, because we'll look at another statue, which is probably from the same site, but found in northeast Sumatra. They made beautiful bronze statues also in Megapathanam in the Buddhist era, which had quite a lot of influence on Southeast Asian bronze sculpture as well from this period. Now, Tamil Buddhism had some specific aspects of its own, and Arun has already mentioned some of these, the Manimakalai, from the 2nd century CE. That says that has the role the major role is played by a woman. It seems that women enjoyed relatively high status in Tamil and Southeast Asian Buddhist literature. And as we skim down through, we see that the importance of the South Indian Buddhism also reached beyond Southeast Asia all the way to India. A Tamil monk translated 53 works from Sanskrit into Chinese. Vajrabodhi, who lived near Kanchipuram 661, moved to China and established the Vajrayana school there, which is also highly influential in Java. So as in Southeast Asia, Buddhism and Hinduism seem to have coexisted amicably in the ports of South India. Now, much of this traffic in Buddhist lore, Buddhist artifacts, was actually carried on Southeast Asian ships, probably such as this ship from the famous relief at Borobudur, showing outriggers, the use of Southeast Asian rigging and so forth. So Borobudur is based on a number of Sanskrit epics, which were then translated into stone on this Javanese monument from the 8th century, 8th and early 9th century. It starts off with a foot in the Mahakarma Vibhanga, which says this is the punishments and the rewards of the various people. The lower right, you can see one of these sculptures from the Mahakarma Vibhanga, which shows the punishment for partying too much. You get reborn as an ugly person. And so you can see they are showing how ugly they are. And you can see there's a little black and white motif there, which shows the writing written above the relief, which says Virupa in Sanskrit. So the Borobudur also was using this kind of Brahmi Pallava script to give inscriptions instructions to the sculptors. Then we have the Avadanas, the Manohara story. We have the beautiful picture of the nymph escaping from the palace. And then we have here we have the dream of Queen Maya, where the elephant is descending into her womb. You can see the elephant on the upper left. And the lower left, we see one of the South Indian depictions of the same scene. So obviously the Javanese sculptors did know about the ways that the icons of these particularly important scenes in Buddha's life were depicted. So they were in a way copying it, but not literally. They changed a lot of the details, but they used the same basic posture as in the Indian depictions. But the most important relief on Borobudur is actually the Gandavyuha, which shows the Bodhisattva Manjusri. Here he's the central figure who lived in South India. This text may have actually been written in Megapathanam. The Gandavyuha is the last part of the Avatamsaka, from which the Yoga Tantric Buddhism developed. The protagonist is a young boy. He wants to become a bodhisattva, and he travels to various cities in South India. It's even been postulated that the name of the monument, Borobudur, comes from a Tamil word, meaning new settlement. So there's lots of connections here, including the location where this most important part of the Borobudur story takes place. And among the different instructors who the young boy Sudana goes to visit, he goes to see both Buddhist and Hindu deities. And so that's why we have both Avalokiteshvara at the left, one of the good friends, and Shiva. Shiva here has become an actual devotee of Buddha. And so he is a teacher. You can see him. He's depicted with his trident, holding his rosary and so on. So here they actually coexist quite amicably. Another important Hindu monument in central Java is Prambanan, and it is basically dedicated to Shiva, but also has Brahma and Vishnu involved in it. And one of the most important aspects of it is this chamber underneath the main statue, which is outlined here in yellow. This is not something which is very commonly found in India, but it does originate from South India and has a very specific purpose, which we'll come to eventually. It's called a consecration deposit. It's a well that goes deep under the central image. Now, this is where I first came to Earth in Southeast Asia. This is Kedah Peak, just north of Penang. For 2 years, I lived at the base of that mountain. And it was while I was there, I became aware of the fact that there was a very important ancient story about the importance of the region to Southeast Asian history as a whole. And this is a beautiful view you get if you sail up the estuary with Kedah Peak in the background. This is a view from the peak of the mountain Gunung Jerai in Malay, looking west from toward which many ships sailed from Kedah, and to which many ships came directly across the Bay of Bengal. If you go due west from the site toward the setting sun, you will end up in South India. And that's how ancient navigators found their way. More and more sites are being discovered in Kedah all the time. South of the Sungai Boromok here, this is where mostly Buddhist sites are found. North of it, mostly Hindu sites are found. The earliest inscriptions here, such as this one on the right, have to do with Buddhism. This one shows a stupa. And this is where I lived. I lived in a place called Sungai Petani, which is the largest town in that area. Of course, Petani in Malay means farmer, but there's a possibility, this is my theory, that actually comes from Patinam, which means a port. And so we also have other handmill names in the region, which seem to be very old, like Kampong Maligai. Maligai meaning a kind of a pleasure palace and so on. So it was in this area that I was going around doing non-archaeological work, but I became aware of all these ruins of ancient times. Most of the earliest remains we have here are Buddhist, like this beautiful bronze image here. Many, many Indian beads and other artifacts from India. But at a later phase, Hinduism became the dominant religion. And mainly Shaivite religion, Candi Bukit Batu Pahat, is the largest structure on the site. It has things like the Ganesha statues and so on connected with it. And a number of these sites had these caskets beneath them, which were for holding these consecration deposits. And recently, a scholar has translated this text called the Kashapa Silpa, which was written in Tamil Nadu in the 11th or 12th century, and it describes how these rituals should be performed. For the most part, these were meant to be used in Hindu sites, but we find them in Southeast Asia in both Hindu and Buddhist sites. And it seems like there are more of these have been discovered by archaeologists in Southeast Asia than India, because in India, a lot of them got removed at various times, but in Southeast Asia, they were more or less left undisturbed in many places. So why was there this transition from Buddhism to Hinduism in Kedah? It has to do with the Tanjore kingdom of the Cholas. This is the Tanjore main temple built in the 11th century. And on the base, it has this inscription of 1030 set up by Rajendra Chola. And you can see him over at the right here in this relief of this painting. And it talks about Rajendra sending off his fleet to attack all the ports in the Straits of Malacca, starting off with Kadaram. He's mentioned twice, Sangam Wijayatungawaraman, king of Kadaram, that's Kedah, together with the elephants. That mentions these other places like Malayu, Srivijaya, Panay, so on. And then so it mentions all these other sites. And again it mentions Kadaram of fierce strength. So for the Tamils, it seems like the most important part of the Srivijayan Empire, this great thalassocracy, was in fact Kedah. So after 1030, Kedah became a Tamil colony for 100 years. Kedah's religion then changed from Buddhism to Hinduism, and the center of activity moved north of the river. But after the Chola era, Kedah declined. Srivijaya also vanished, and the monopoly of trade was broken. Other ports appeared. This is Rajendra Chola being congratulated by Shiva for his feat in defeating Srivijaya. These are the locations of the ports mentioned in this inscription. So Kedah has now become a very popular place for specifically those interested in ancient Malayan and Malaysian culture. There's a very active group called the Friends of Bujang. And so if you go online, you'll see lots and lots of events that they are holding. And sometimes, of course, there are stories in Tamil. Obviously, the Tamils have a very great interest in this. So Kedah has now been revived and has become a quite active location for the study of ancient Malay culture in general. Now, one of the most important archaeologists who worked on this subject is Professor Dayalan from the Archaeological Survey of India. He writes about how Megapathanam replaced Patanam as an important maritime center, mentioned all the way back in the 2nd century by an Alexandrian Greek, Chinese, 7th century Marco Polo, Burmese king of the 15th century. So it was a very important Buddhist center for 1,500 years. Archaeologists have found 350 Buddhists almost 1,000 years. There's a reference to this Palawa king Narasimhavarman, during whose reign a Buddhist temple was constructed there with support from a Chinese emperor. And there was also an important input from Kedah, which I'll mention later. So these are the voyages of the various Chinese pilgrims who went to India to study Buddhism. You can see the red line, that's the voyage taken up to Bengal. You can also see the 2 green lines. They go both over to Kanchipuram or South India coast, and generally the other goes to Sri Lanka. So some Chinese Buddhist pilgrims did not go to Northeast India, not to Nalanda. They went to South India instead to study Buddhism. And we have 2 inscriptions. The larger light and plate of Vajrajaja Chola recorded this Buddhist temple to the Warma Vihara, erected by the Kedah king. So the Kedah king sponsored a Buddhist temple, and then a village was granted to support the temple. And it's said to have been built by Myarawijanga Tungawaraman, Lord of Srivijaya, which was ruling Kedah. Then we have this other set of plates, which was set up about 100 years later, again records another temple which was sponsored jointly by Kedah, the king of Kidara, and the local Buddhists in South India. So there are 2 inscriptions which show that there was just as much royal support for Southeast Asian, specifically Kedah monks in South India as there was in Northeast India. Now, what's it have to do with Singapore? Well, of course, the Malayan Isles. They were written up in the Johor River in 1612. Mentions, of course, that Singapore was founded by a descendant of Iskandar the Great, who had a son named, who is Raja Kedah Hindi, who ruled half India, converted to Islam, married his daughter, had a son who succeeded him, and Raja Shulan was succeeded by Raja Chulan. These are obviously both metaphors for Rajendra Chola, slightly transformed in the Malay inscription. So Raja Chulan wants to go to India, but gets only as far as Temasek. So he goes into the sea in a glass case, and he was from Megapathanam. So Raja Chulan, Singapore's first ruler, was from Megapathanam, South India. And eventually went back to India, and his son was Sangnila Utama, who became Singapore's king. So he was the sire than the South Indian rulers. And Palembang itself, that was the location where Srivijaya's capital probably was located. There is a Chola coin which has been discovered here up on this hill where Buddhist remains have been discovered. This is the hill where Rajendra Chola's son, Sangnila Utama, supposedly first appeared. And we find both Tamil artifacts, Buddhist artifacts such as this Bodhisattva statue, and I also find even artifacts from all the way out across the ocean, the Persian Gulf. Now, what happened after 1030 or so? Well, and there are more Tamil inscriptions found in Sumatra, the Straits of Malacca, throughout the 11th century. One is dated 1088, and it's up here on the northwest coast of Sumatra, a place called Barus, where apparently there was a large Tamil merchant colony which were interested in both the gold of the mountains and also the camphor. It says there was a Tamil merchant gold here at the time. We record some regulations regarding trade. This is in Old Tamil language. So that's an important site where there was a Tamil colony at this period. We find South Indian ceramics at the site. There was a Buddhist statue found here in the 19th century, but it's been lost. So unfortunately, we don't have any good records of it, but there were probably Tamil Buddhists at the site. Similar inscription from Aceh on the north coast shows the importance of Tamil trading gold guilds throughout the northern side of the Straits of Malacca. Also a place called Padang Lawas. Oh, sorry, Aceh. Aceh first. This Buddhist statue, head is the only part that's left, was found also in Aceh. So there was Buddhism in Aceh before Islam was there. And there are other evidences of Hindu type architecture in Aceh, both architecture and also pottery. But the place I did my doctoral research was a place called Kota China, which is on the northeast coast of Sumatra in the mangroves and coconut plantations. And at this particular site, we found a number of imported statues from South India, both Hindu and Buddhist. I asked you to remember the type of Buddhist statue that was found there in the site uh, in South India. And of course, here we have this one at the lower center, which also is in the very similar type. And it shows that it's the same kind of legs, the same kind of posture. The head was stolen at one particular point, unfortunately. But the statue obviously was imported from South India. And probably the Vishnu and the Lakshmi statue there also were imported. And then we have the Shiva Lingang. So there was a great variety of religions at this particular trading port, both Hinduism and South Indian Buddhism. Padang Lawas, there's a Tamil inscription up in the hinterland, and there still remains of about 25 Vajrayana temples or so in this area. And there is one Tamil inscription in this area too. And that's what we, as we noted, the Tamil region was instrumental in setting up this Vajrayana kind of Buddhism. And Jambi, this was, of course, the capital of Malayu. It was a major trading port area as well. Lots and lots of religious sites have been discovered. This is a very large place at a site called Muara Jambi. These are all very large temple complexes. Here again, we have Buddhist images for the most part. This one on the upper right is of a female bodhisattva, again, underlining the importance of the female aspect of Buddhism. And this is the remains of one of the consecration deposits, which was found in one of the major temples there, which was made out of lead. So these particular consecration deposits were also found in Malayu. Now, the Brahmi script continued to be used in Malacca even after the conversion to Islam. This is a not very well-known site that's in Negeri Sembilan called Bengkalang Kempas, but it has a kind of artifact here which is very analogous to what are called hero stones in South India. The kind of stone which is meant to record a particular feat of a certain heroic figure. This is the stone with a hole in it and various other artifacts associated with it. It was actually a very important ceremonial site during the Malacca Sultanate, and two sides of it are still written in the Brahmi script, the Palawa Granta type script, and two sides in Jawi. And so here you have the Kawi inscription in the left. So they were still using this Kawi, which is the local version of Brahmi script, up until the mid 15th century. And then the mid 15th century, they switched to using Jawi, Arabic script. So right until the middle of the 15th century, this type of South Indian monumental script was still in use in the Malay Peninsula. And of course, it then formed the basis for the Javanese script as here, as well as the other scripts still used in modern Southeast Asia, Thailand, Cambodia, Myanmar. Not only the Buddhist aspect, but obviously South Indian Buddhism was instrumental for about 1,000 years in leaving behind many of the important monuments that we still have, and it was important also as a linking factor that united many of the commercial communities in Southeast Asia. So this then, as we go into the later period, about the 15th century, that's when we start to get more Tamil and North Indian Muslim influence. But the archaeological evidence for 1,000 years of Tamil Buddhism in Southeast Asia is quite strong. I think I will stop at this point. I think I've exhausted my 25 minutes, and so I'll quit and turn the session back over to the moderator.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Miksic. Quite unprecedented, very insightful, and truly an eye-opening archaeological expedition that you took us through. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
May I now invite Arun once again to engage Professor Miksic on his presentation. All of us will have a lot of burning questions, but I think Arun will do the first honors.
The privilege of being the moderator. Thank you, Ali. Prof. Miksic, you made a very strong statement at the beginning that this region was Buddhist before it became Hindu. That's not very well known, I think. People remember the Hinduization of Southeast Asia, and there is, people know that even as far up north as Vietnam, you have the Champa Kingdom, and then there is at the other end the Bali Hindu Kingdom. Now, what is the extent of Buddhist influence in Southeast Asia? Was it confined to a very small area, or was it all pervasive throughout Southeast Asia?
Buddhism was quite widespread, but it was not as popular among the general population. I wouldn't say that Buddhism came in to Southeast Asia first. Both Buddhism and Hinduism seem to have arrived more or less simultaneously. The first inscription we find in Indonesia, that Kutai inscription, is definitely Hindu, but it's Vedic. It doesn't espouse any particular deity. It still talks about sacrificing animals to Brahmans. But in the Malay region, the Straits of Malacca, and also in South Vietnam, the earliest signs we have of Indic religion there are Buddhist. The oldest statues we have are actually wooden statues from the Mekong Delta. They're Buddhist statues. They were preserved in the mud near the site of Okeo. So Mekong Delta west of Saigon, Ho Chi Minh City. And those we can carbon date. And so they are actually 3rd century. But Hinduism was much more widespread. Buddhism seems to have been mainly found in the ports and the urban areas.
Do you think it was, you also mentioned that they coexisted, there wasn't any great conflict between these two religions? And was this accepted by the native population in equal measure, or was it just that the Indians who brought it, because they have already been socialized into both religions, they brought it along, but here, one religion had a greater attraction than the other? What would you say to that?
It seems to me that what the Southeast Asians found attractive about Indian culture in general was its cosmology, its worldview. And it gave a kind of universal aspect to human existence, which local prehistoric religions, as far as we can tell, did not. I think the general population thought both of them shared certain common values. And that's why we find many rulers in Southeast Asia sponsoring both kinds of religions. Right up until the 15th century, kings would sponsor both Hindu and Buddhist shrines. Obviously, some of them had inclinations. Most of them had inclinations one way or the other. But it seems that Buddhism, again, was attractive in the Straits of Malacca. And so, I mean, you can make the argument that this is maybe because of its literary aspect. Buddhism sponsored a lot of text. It was very text-based, whereas Hinduism, you could say, was more practice-based. It was more performative, yes. And also, Hinduism gave answers to a lot of things like, what should I do at birth, death, and marriage, and so on, which Buddhism doesn't pay any attention to at all because it's not important.
And also it venerated the rulers, you know, they were elevated to a much grander positions by the Hindu traditions and rituals, right? Whereas in Buddhism, it was not focused on governance issues.
Not initially, that's true. But in Southeast Asia, this is one of the things the Southeast Asians did, was they actually began to figure out ways to imply that some of the rulers were bodhisattvas.
Yes.
They didn't do this in India. They didn't deify, but they didn't claim to be Buddhas, but they claimed to be able to be initiated into these, say, Vajrayana, these esoteric Buddhist cults, in which they could then take on, let's say, some of the powers of a bodhisattva. But
that's why even in the recent coronation in Thailand, we saw mantras being uttered in not only in Thai, but in Sanskrit as well as in Tamil.
And Pali
it
also.
was fascinating. Yeah, that's right. Now, finally, because we have a number of people waiting to ask you questions, the decline, was there again a kind of a staggered schedule in the decline of Buddhism and Hinduism before Islam spread, much of the Southeast Asian region, or did they disappear or decline at about the same time?
There was a transition about the same time in both the mainland and the islands. In Southeast Asian mainland, it was mainly from Hinduism, although there was some Mahayana Buddhism, especially Angkor, the 12th century, to Theravada Buddhism, which was a major shift. And then in the islands, for the most part, it was, of course, from Mahayana Buddhism into Islam. So both of those transitions took place more or less at the same period between the 13th and 15th centuries. And then I'm sure it was partly due to what was going on in India.
In India, exactly.
In India. So there was a parallelism right through both the introduction of Hinduism and Buddhism between South India and Southeast Asia, and then Islamization, but the perpetuation of Vijayanagara for a while. So you can say that it was definitely corresponding to events in India in both places, but they went in different directions. So why did they go different directions? That one we can talk about all day. But it'll all be theoretical.
Okay, thank you so much. Now I will hand the discussion over to Ali, who is going to field some of the questions from our audience.
Thank you. Thank you, Arun, and thank you, Professor Miksic. Some questions have come from the members of the audience. Let me start with this. Quite a long question. I'll take it at verbatim. Apart from Bahasa, apart from Bahasa, you, Professor Miksic, seem to have spent some time learning Tamil words, materials, and places in Southeast Asia. Does the word Patani that appears quite frequently in Thailand also means
yes,
port city?
Basically, I'm pretty sure that it does come from Tamil. So either on a river, it doesn't have to be on the sea, it can also be river. So I'm pretty sure that it derives from there. I call also, even in Thailand, of course, we also have a Singapura even, but it's pronounced Singburi. But Singburi is Singapura. Yes, I'm pretty sure because I haven't done a study of this, but based on off the top of my head, I would suggest that this is in fact what happened in Thailand too.
I have another question about the Chola, the Chola influence. Cholas had influence in the Srivijaya Empire. Where did the Pallava influence? Which part? Probably that's what they want to ask. Which parts of this region that Pallava's influence extended over?
Pretty much it's different degrees. One can say it extended pretty much over the whole region, but especially the areas around the Straits of Malacca, Western Java, it was the strongest. Further east from there is also Pallava influence, especially in southern Vietnam, through the kingdom of Champa. Champa was a very important kingdom at this period. It's hard to say that it was ever very strongly unified because there were maybe 4 or 5 different regions. But again, that's one area which, again, it adopted Hinduism for the most part. As in a Malayo-Polynesian speaking area, I must emphasize that. It doesn't speak Mon Khmer or Vietnamese languages. The Cham is actually a Malayo-Polynesian language. And so they were in very close contact with the Malay Peninsula. And so there are still a number of Cham who are still Hindu. So they still maintain that. And if you look at the statuary, it looks very much like the South Indian Hindu statuary, the ones that have been preserved. There's a very good museum in Da Nang, which preserves a lot of the statuary. So in that particular part of Southeast Asia, again, one can see a pretty strong Pallava period type influence.
And the Pallavas, would it be accurate to call them Tamil kings?
I believe so. I've always assumed they were, because they are in that region. They're the names of the cities that they ruled from. They seem to me to be Tamil. I'm pretty sure that they were, but I would have to ask another India specialist to confirm that. But the area they are in is in what I think is a Tamil-speaking zone, Tamil Nadu.
Thank you, Prof. Yet another question. You mentioned briefly monks who have traveled to South India instead of going to Nalanda. Who are some of these monks, and why were they in the south, and where, which parts?
Okay. This one important monk we know of who wrote about this was a Chinese named Yi Ching, and he sailed through Srivijaya including stopping off at Kedah, and then he sailed up to Tamralipti in Bengal. But then he mentions about 60 other monks, Chinese monks, who were going also to India, of which about, say, 2/3 of them went by sea. The other third went by land, but already by the 7th century, people realized it was much more comfortable to go by sea to India to get the scriptures and to study Buddhism. And so of those, actually about half of them went to South India, and most of them to the Kanchipuram, Megapathanam area. Some went to Sri Lanka, or some went to both places. They could go to both of them easily. So it was approximately equal in popularity through. We don't have a complete record, so I can't say over time, but we know that in the 7th century, Megapathanam was about equally popular as Nalanda in Bengal was at this period. And the names of these, the Chinese names of them, are recorded in I Ching's record. So you can look that up. I don't have them, unfortunately, at my fingertips, but it's possible. It's quite easy to look them up.
Thank you, Professor Miksic. This information that you shared today about Nagapattinam is somewhat personal to me, because my father hails from Nagapattinam.
Oh, really?
So, yes. And if you went to Nagapattinam today, you may not even see traces of such a strong Buddhist influence, and I think that's very telling of the way history evolves, or how history is written, or how history is lost. Now, that brings us actually to the next question. This is very interesting. I find this question really very interesting. What was the role of the Tamil traders in the spread of the Buddhist networks?
Obviously, it was quite significant. Let me put this in perspective by saying that it was the Southeast Asians who were also active in the spread. But obviously, there were lots of Indians who went to Southeast Asia. We have records of them in Cambodia as being king's teachers, also in Java. So there were obviously Tamil Buddhists who were traveling to Southeast Asia, and some of them were monks who were actually invited. We know that there was one particular Indian monk who was in Srivijaya during I Ching's time. So in the 7th century, there was one particular teacher who would come from South India. I can't remember his name. I don't recall. I don't memorize these names. I'm more of an archaeologist than a historian. All I can say is it's in my chapter in your book. So if you want to look up the specific name, you can find it in the book that was published by the Indian Heritage Center. But the names of some of these specific Indian monks in Southeast Asia are recorded in the various sources, and they were quite famous in India, some of them. So Southeast Asia was actually able to attract some of the academic stars of the period to go and teach in their monasteries. So we know so much about Nalanda. It's a pity we don't know more about the actual Megapathanam monastery, because it must have been also another very significant center of learning and dispersal of various kinds of texts, such as the Gandavyuha. But because there was this gap, the gap was all over India. Buddhism basically began to weaken already by the 11th, 12th century in India, and only got preserved in places like Nepal, Tibet, China, Japan, Korea, and parts of Southeast Asia. So a lot of the original texts from there were lost, but there's still a possibility that one might rediscover them, like this Kashapa Silpa was only recently discovered and translated into English about 10, 12 years ago by Anna Shaleska. And of course, one needs a lot of specialized knowledge of how to read, say, 11th, 12th century Tamil in order to read these things. It's hard to find.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Miksic, and thank you, Arun, for making this Saturday evening truly fabulous. We learned a lot, and different paradigms were presented. So much of information, so much of knowledge, and so little time. If this had been a live event, I would have asked for a standing ovation. You can assume one for yourselves. Fantastic job. Thank you. Thank you.
One very quick one to Prof. Miksic. The Sejarah Melayu, which you also refer to, does it reflect the Hindu and the Buddhist influences fully, or is there some kind of camouflaging, as it were? Because I mean, Sejarah Melayu is both historical, but it's also it has taken poetic license in telling the historical account. What's your impression?
The most obvious traces of Buddhism are, first of all, the title Srivijaya, let's say. Sangnila Utama, of course, he somehow was born under the Straits of Malacca, pops up on Bukit Seguntang. I see one of the audience asked that question. It's kind of mysterious how he got from Singapore to Palembang, but then he came back to Singapore. So his title is, there was a text written in Thailand in the 14th century called this, it's about the doctrine of the three worlds. Sri Tribwana is the three worlds in Sanskrit. And that was a very influential text in Thailand in the 14th century. And of course, it means the three worlds of the world of gods,
yes, that's right.
the underworld. Yeah. So that is a Buddhist text. And so his title is Buddhist. But then the name of the, Raja Chulan, that's obviously a reference to the Cholas. Now, unfortunately, the version we have is the Raffles manuscript number 18, which was copied up there in Batu Sawar in 1612.
Right.
And probably by a Singaporean who had just evacuated Singapore, because Singapore probably got destroyed by the Portuguese. And so he was probably writing this text. It's not the oldest version. Well, we're sure he had an older text to work from. But the Malays had already been Muslim for 200 years by this time. So obviously there is a layer in the Malay annals, the part about Singapore, which is pre-Islamic. And that's when they moved to Malacca, then they convert to Islam. So there is a Chola connection that's not overtly Hindu, however. Although the few things that we can see in there are more Buddhist than Hindu.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
I kind of just mentioned just one thing.
Yeah.
That if you look at some of the chants used by some of the Malay dukuns, there is Hindu Shaivite influence in that.
Okay.
So if we go into the dukuns chants, we can see there was Hindu influence. So it's a wider thing, and that we don't have time to discuss that, unfortunately.
Another day, another story. Thank you, Prof. But before we wind up, I must say a word about my co-moderator and co-editor. I was actually very, very privileged to have a young lady by the name of Nalina Gopal as my co-editor, who's far more knowledgeable than myself. And she also basically conceived all these webinars. So I thought it's fitting for her to have the closing remarks for this wonderful webinar that you gave, Prof. Miksic. So over to Nalina. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Arun, and thank you, Prof. Miksic. But before I sort of, deliver my concluding remarks, I just thought that both you and I have probably seen this question on the fragments of the Singapore stone that have long been rumored to be in India. So I just thought I could respond to that slide that you had on the Singapore stone because, in 2018, we sort of conducted a search with the team at the Indian Museum. And what we found was extremely interesting, that both of the fragments that had long rumored to be in their collection was in fact, as far as they were concerned, a complete phantom. We were actually given permission to inspect their reserve stores, and we did. And together with them, we found that there was absolutely no mention of it in their catalog at all. And this was quite interesting because James Lowe, the same man who deposited the Singapore stone fragments in the collection of the Asiatic Society of Bengal, also deposited the Buddhagutta stone at the same time, which he discovered in the Malay Peninsula. And while ironically, the Buddhagutta inscription had been catalogued as MP1 or Malay Peninsula 1, these fragments had never been catalogued into the Asiatic Society's collection and therefore never inherited by the Indian Museum. So this is a little story that we tell about the mystery surrounding the Singapore stone in the exhibition that's currently ongoing at the center, From the Coromandel Coast to the Straits, Revisiting Our Tamil Heritage, for which, of course, this book was published in complement. And we've offered some interpretations with the help of scholars, including Titi Surti Nastiti from Jakarta, Gupta as well as Ian Sinclair. And I hope that, those who had questions about the Singapore stones, whereabouts, come and visit the exhibition to find out about this story as well. But thank you, Prof. Miksic. And really, in Singapore's multicultural context, it has been so important for us at the center to be able to delineate the experiences of our Indian communities, presenting lesser known aspects of heritage in the country as well as in the wider context of Southeast Asia. That Tamil diasporic connections have continued uninterruptedly since pre-modern times in the region is an important preface to the Singapore experience. And some aspects of these pre-modern experiences are chronicled by 13 authors in volume 1 of our publication, Sojourners to Settlers, Tamils in Southeast Asia and Singapore. We have been privileged to hear erudite Professor Miksic on the lesser known aspect of Tamil participation in Buddhist networks with Southeast Asia. At our soon to close exhibition From the Coromandel Coast to the Straits, Revisiting Our Tamil Heritage, some visual materials that you have heard about during Professor Miksic's talk can be seen, including a 3D hologram of the larger Leiden Grant, a diminutive but important bronze of Buddha from Megapathanam, a renowned Buddhist center during the Chola era, as well as some archaeological finds from Kedah. Lastly, a 20th century edition published in 1931 by U.V. Swaminatha Iyer of Sithalai Sathanar's Mani Megalai is on display at the exhibition and is on loan to us from the collection of the Sri Dandayudapani Temple's library. While we have heard on archaeological connections, it's also important to note that in literature dating to the Sangam era, such as Mani Megalai, faraway landscapes, including Javakam, or Java as it is referred to in Mani Megalai, together with Rattinativam, Kanchipuram, and Pugar, mark the boundaries of the Buddhist world as far as that literary epic was concerned. I hope that participants visit the exhibition before it closes on 30th September 2020 to appreciate this very rare opportunity that we in Singapore have to see these important vestiges of diasporic Tamil heritage on display at the center. Sojourners to Settlers is also to be published in Tamil. This is a first for both the Indian Heritage Center and for the Institute of Policy Studies. And leading up to the launch of the Tamil version of the publication in April 2021 during the Tamil Language Festival, this webinar series really aims to provide you glimpses of the publication's offerings. The series is actually bilingual, so alternate sessions will be in Tamil as well. We would like to heartily thank Professor Miksic for readily agreeing to speak during this webinar series. We would also like to take the opportunity to thank Mr. Arun Maharnan for moderating this session and for his absolute dedication and passion in championing the community's heritage. This publication wouldn't have been possible without the generous support of the Tamil Language Learning and Promotion Committee, Yuva Bharati International School, as well as the Tamil Language Council. Our heartiest gratitude to them. And of course, my final thanks to Ali, who also readily agreed to be the series host. Over to you, Ali.
Thank you, Nalina. Thank you. Now, this webinar series continues on the 28th of November, 2020 at 5 p.m. Singapore time with Dr. Thorsten Sasha speaking from Berlin on Tamil Muslim diaspora, another interesting topic, and their heritage in Southeast Asia and Singapore. He'll be speaking in Tamil. A German expert speaking in Tamil, we look forward to all of you joining us again. And should you like to register for the session, please email us or stay tuned to the Indian Heritage Center's PTX or Facebook pages. And Nalina and team, thank you very much for making this happen. It's been a fabulous Saturday evening. There was so much. I know that there was just not enough time for everything to come through. But I really hope that we will meet all of you again in similar sessions. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. And yes, let's meet once again in the month of November. Thank you.